I've worked with a lot of survivors over the years, and I've amalgamated their responses to the question, do you believe in God? And people say to them, do you believe in God? After what you went through, do you have emunah? Do you believe in say God, call it a benevolent power in the universe, whatever you want to call it. Do you believe that there's order in this universe, that there is a figure that you can turn to? And almost all of them, whether they're religiously observant or not, are almost offended by the question. Of course I believe in God, but I'm not talking to him. I am not speaking to him. Of course he's there. Of course the world has something that keeps it going, but I have no desire to be in contact with that entity. Now, it sounds almost like a laugh line, like a Borscht Belt joke, of course there's a God, but I'm not talking to him. But when you analyze it, it's really, I think, gives us the very deep ideas which will relate to some of the readings, perhaps, if we have a chance to get to them. Because there's two options. Either you say that God is omnipotent. God is all-powerful. And if he's all-powerful, how is it possible that he let this happen? If God is omnipotent and he let, as the gentleman said when we were in Spot, he let my father, my mother, my sister, my brother, my children to be murdered, then why would I want to have anything to do with a God like that? That's a useless God. He has the power to stop it and he doesn't stop it. The other option is to say, God isn't omnipotent. He doesn't have the power. Free will, after all. We human beings can do what we want, and God won't stop us from doing it. And to that, too, the survivors, or we would say, so a God like that, he's irrelevant. He's irrelevant. He has no power. He doesn't impact anything. We make the decision still. What do I need him in there for? And yes, if you take a look at, I chose two or three readings that I think it's worthwhile taking a look at. Some of my favorite ones in terms of dealing with the Shoah, because they go to the very heart of the question of our faith and who we are. Our faith as individuals, our faith as Jews. And if we start with the one that's called, O God of Mercy. I don't know if I have to read the whole thing, but O God of mercy, for the time being, choose another people. We are tired of death, tired of corpses. We have no more prayers. For the time being, choose another people. We have run out of blood for victims. Our houses have been turned into deserts. God of mercy, lift up your fiery brow. Take back the divine glory of your genius. And this goes in the direction of what the survivors said. Yes, of course I believe in God, but I don't want anything to do with him. What kind of a God gives us this kind of a destiny? And it goes back to Tzaddik V'Ralo, Rasha V'Tovlo, but very specifically in terms of Am Yisrael. And then we get to the poem written by Hila Blumgraber, who, as far as I know, a high school student, what I wrote there on the side. And she's complaining about Jewish education as it relates to this. You taught us to strive for a life of ideals. You exhorted through verses and poems to soar on the wings of enthusiasms, to unravel life's innermost secret. Because we're taught to study, we're taught to value intellectual, taught about spirituality. Avram Lowenthal saying to the man, ultimately everything is going to be good, don't worry. God's got it all under control. But she ends with, you shouldn't have taught us, Torah and Gemara and philosophy. You should have taught us to shriek until we're heard, how to crash through a gate that is cracked, how to kill to avoid getting killed, and to get get used to the glitter of blood. Oh, erudite teachers, men of vast knowledge, did you really and truly not know that the earth has no place for a humanist? Why did you plant that yearning in our heart? And this is really a lament that we have to God, right? For those who have faith and believe, Selam Elokim, that we have been created with this yearning for goodness, this yearning to connect to what is good and right and spiritual. If you will, why? When we're living in this crap of a world, why would you give us the yearning for that which is so marvelous. So many after the Shoah said, you know what, this whole God thing, we don't need it. But what's the problem? What's the alternative? Like today, you could look the generations leading up to the Shoah. It's like, the early modern period, the 1800s into the 1900s, the Industrial Revolution, science, medicine. People were coming to the conclusion that there's no more need for spirituality, superstitions. They're all science, knowledge will save us. In other words, don't put your faith in God or in some benevolent entity. Put your faith in humanity. Put your faith in humanity. Our progress will give us the future. Now, let's say if you reasonably say, I reject God, because either way, he's not helping here, and I go to humanity, then you're in even bigger trouble. Because you look at humanity and what humanity is capable of doing to itself and to others, you're worse off than with God. With God, at least you have a hope of some sort of benevolence. Whereas if you're dealing with humanity, what do you have left? And then we get to that very famous reading, which we sometimes just read very quickly without thinking about it. Sometimes I would like to ask God why God allows poverty, famine, and injustice when God could do something about it. Well, why don't you ask God? Because I'm afraid that God might ask me the same question. The failure of humanity in the Shoah and in most things that happen in our world is much louder and much more powerful, if you will, than the failure of God within that. There's a story. I heard it in connection to understanding the book of Job, which maybe will give us a direction here on how to, grapple with this. No answers. We know in Jewish life, the questions are always much more important than the answers. As my grandfather, should rest in peace, would paraphrase many of the great Chachamim who said, in Jewish learning, if you ask a question and you get an answer and you're satisfied with the answer, either you misunderstood the answer or you didn't ask the question right, because every answer needs to bring you to another question. Because we don't, Judaism doesn't go to a nirvana, maybe when you're dead, not when you're alive, where it's this constant ferment between what could be the potential of our lives, the potential of the world, and what really is. But the story is told, and I believe it's about Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, who is known as the great advocate for Am Yisrael. And the story goes something like this. It's a typical Hasidic story. It was a few days after Yom Kippur, and Reb Levi Yitzchak was walking in Berditchev, and he sees one of his Hasidim, and he realizes, oh my God, he says, he wasn't in Shul on Yom Kippur. The man wasn't in Shul on Yom Kippur. But he didn't want to confront him in a mean sort of way. He said, repeat. He says, I didn't see you in Shul on Yom Kippur. Is everything okay? And the man answers him, said, Rabbi, listen, I'm not perfect. I make mistakes. I sin. But my sinning, what about I missed the shacharit, I didn't wash my hands properly, maybe when I was traveling I didn't eat the right thing. These are my sins. But God sins? God brings plagues in the world? God allows war to happen? God brings earthquakes and floods? I should ask him for forgiveness? What are you talking about? If anything, he should be asking us for forgiveness. And Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berditchev looked at him and said, he says, what a pity that you weren't in Shul on Yom Kippur. That would have been the argument that might have won us the case with God. And to some degree, one of the ways of reading Eov and reading the whole Tzadik V'Ra'la V'Rasha V'Tovlo gets to the heart, and with this almost to the end here, the heart of what faith means within a Jewish context. I think part of our problem is that we've absorbed the ideas of faith from a lot of different places over the centuries. And we sometimes have the idea that faith means I turn to God, I turn to the benevolent being, I pray, And then what I ask for is supposed to happen. My vision of what the world should be is what I expect God, the deity, to do. But one of the understandings that we said, one of the understandings of Eov is that we don't understand God. But another one could definitely be read as, and certainly the story of Ehrlich, what we're asking for is an audience. What we're asking for is a dialogue. What faith means within a Jewish context is that we believe that somehow there is an order to this world. We don't believe in the pagan gods who are subject to every failing of man, that we believe that there is somehow a perfection in this world. We're not conceited enough to believe that we can understand it and to know it, but we have this faith that it's there somewhere. And all we ask from God, or if you will, the gift that God has given us is the right, which is not muvan me'elav, the right to approach God and to make our case. Whether our case will be accepted or not, whether our case makes sense or not, whether the way we think the world should be makes sense or not, this becomes almost irrelevant. But Jewish faith is about being in relationship with that which we believe is the world, which we call God. And again, Jewish civilization developed. How are we in relationship with that? Through mitzvot, through prayer, through tradition, through song, through music, whatever it is, but not with the idea that, I prayed, therefore I'm getting, but I connect to God, and therefore somehow I connect to my very essence, the very essence of who I am. So faith after that. So how do people go through the Holocaust still have faith? Because they don't have a faith in the sense of God, God is like Santa Claus. I gave him a list and he's giving me what I wanted. But they have the sense of faith that there is some order in this world, whether I get it or not. It's still there, and we have a right to demand it, whether our demands make sense or not. And that gets us, if you will, to the last of the readings that we've also known, but it makes sense to some degree, I think, in this context. I believe in the sun even when it is not shining. I believe in love when feeling it not. I believe in God even when he is silent. And that idea that, we don't necessarily have to hear back from God, but the constant dialogue that we have, which allows us to be in touch with the world, have a sense that, yes, there's a potential for this world to be right, if you will. That's where faith comes in. And look, we're in Corona, we're in a plague now. Who knows what happens next? We're working on every front, obviously, the human front, the God front. But if we have faith, the idea being that there is a balance to the world somehow, and there is he or it or she, whatever you will, which balances it, then faith can be a very useful tool to get through something that we're going through. And certainly, as we remember, the Shoah can also then become a useful tool if we say, gee, I don't understand it, and yet I know that not only, but even though I don't understand it, I have a right, I'm a stakeholder, and I have a right to make demands within that, whether those demands will be met or not. And so that was my idea for this year's Yom HaShoah.
Danny, that was really very, very beautiful. Thank you. I would, it's hard to add something after that because you've raised so many important questions. I'll just say from our experience with our own lives was that when people would come to us and say Baruch Dayan Emet, I would say, please, I don't want to hear that. I can't hear that. And then people would say, Tov, Mina Shamayim Tinuchamu. And I said, well, that's better. But I guess the words that spoke to us the most were Im HaShamayim Tinuchamu. Because one concept is the concept of the world making sense, of God making sense. And the other is just what Rav Soloveitchik talked about, the ultimate issue of loneliness, just having the presence of God. What that means what its correlation is to the cosmos, to Tzaddik Veralo, is well beyond all of us. But the sense of holding on to that sense of a presence, and I think that's why even those who say, I believe in God, but I'm not on speaking terms with Him. To be not on speaking terms is itself an act of relationship. And then we have Shuvu Banim El Avotechem and Shuva Elai Hashem, and we hope that we can find somehow. At least I can tell you that I'm sure that God is also shedding a tear when He hears the Azakah. I think we should say thank you to Dani, thank you to Esti, and we'll try to reconvene for Yom HaZikaron, and if not on the roof of the office, then on our own roofs. Somehow going out in the street and watching the cars stop loses some of its effect on Rehov Rimon in Efrat, where there are no cars in the first place. But the silence speaks for us. Yeah.
Everybody should stay well and healthy, and we'll reconvene next week. Yes, Yom HaZikaron.
And everybody really should be healthy and well, and use the time to every day to do something that you wouldn't have done otherwise, and to go deeper into the things that you're already doing.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Esti.
Thank you.
תודה רבה. תודה רבה.
תודה רבה.